Limiting immigration is actually a core demand of the Conservative parties. However, a look at the figures for the United Kingdom shows that a total of 42% of the foreign-born population came to the country after 2010. That means during the Conservative government. The Conservative Party has been in power in Great Britain for more than 10 years, almost 14 years, and has long been committed to limiting immigration. Around 8 years ago, the British population voted for the country to leave the European Union. At the time, Brexit supporters argued that Britain's exit from the EU would enable the government to, what they call, regain control of the country's borders and reduce immigration, an issue that concerns a large part of the population. A closer look at the developments in recent years shows, however, that immigration to Great Britain has not decreased but increased. And as I said, in total, 42% of the foreign-born population came to the country after 2010 during the Conservative government. And that is a major setback for the government of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Especially since Brexit, not only the volume of migration to the United Kingdom has changed, but also its composition. In the 3 years before the Brexit vote in summer 2016, immigration from the EU to Great Britain was greater than immigration from non-EU countries. Since the decision to leave the EU, this pattern has reversed. Immigration from non-EU countries has increased significantly, and in 2022 alone, around 600,000 more people immigrated to Great Britain than left the country, and that is 100,000 more than the year before. And more than 550,000 people left the country, but the total number of immigrants in 22 was around 1.16 million. The main reasons for the increase were people who came to the UK from non-EU countries to work, study and for humanitarian reasons, said Jay Lindop, the director of the Center for International Migration. This also included people from Ukraine and Hong Kong, with whom the UK has visa agreements. But illegal boat migrants are still reaching the island, and this year alone, according to the Home Office, more than 6,260 migrants have crossed the English Channel irregularly to the UK in small boats, and that is a quarter more than in the same period last year and more than ever before. In the whole of last year, there were 29,437 migrants, the year before 45,000, and a total of almost 120,000 migrants have arrived since 2018. And a good 90% of them have applied for asylum, and more than 50,000 applications have not yet been decided. Around 3/4 of the migrants came from Iran, Albania, Iraq, Afghanistan and Syria. And in recent months, the number of Vietnamese has risen sharply. And like ping pong, the controversial Rwanda law was passed back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords in London. The curious thing is, the lords and ladies had their rejections communicated in Old French, because London still lives a little bit in the 11th century. The British House of Lords does not have a mandate derived from the will of the people. It's not elected like the members of the legislative chamber, the House of Commons, but is based on the judgment of appointed lords and ladies, the so-called peers. Nevertheless, it traditionally intervenes deeply in the parliamentary business of Westminster. The House of Commons must submit every legislative proposal to the House of Lords for approval. And that you hear in the language of the Norman conquerors of the 11th century in Old French. And a pick and game of ping pong is happening there. If the peers want to reject a bill because they think it's not sufficiently well thought out, politically contestable, they send the bill back to the Commons with reasons like I don't speak Old French. But if, however, the peers agree with the work presented, as in the majority of cases, they formulate this with a simple soit baillé aux communes, that it should be sent to the Commons. And this is the last step before legal validity, the royal approval. And the monarch signs, the king wants it. The Rwanda bill, the Sunak government's plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda without the right to be heard, was rejected 4 times. Among the reasons, the strongest argument was that Rwanda was not a third country sufficiently protected by human rights laws. Of course, after the fourth attempt to torpedo a law, the House of Commons has the last word, and the government's draft received the coveted royal "the king wants it." This is why London was recently able to finally launch the first test flight to Rwanda. An African migrant who was given £3,000 pocket money for the trip played the role of a voluntary deportee. And meanwhile, the British Home Office announced that it was planning to send 5,700 refugees to Rwanda by the end of the year, at a cost of €19,950,000 if the Sunak government were as generous as they were with the first volunteer. After the battle won in Old French, London no longer wants to let anyone stop it from proceeding. If the European Court of Human Rights, of which the island is still a member, were to object to the start of the Rwanda flights, which are planned for June, a strong Tory minority has already let their Prime Minister know that Britain will not allow itself to be prevented by any court of law whatsoever from enforcing British law. Britain first. In these circles, people are counting on the return of Donald Trump, for example. Whether in Old French or in modern diction, they are ready for battle here. And the British government's radical measures of deporting refugees without valid papers to the third country of Rwanda is highly controversial. Human rights activists have already strongly criticized British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for the plan. But here in Germany as well, the planned deportation flights to the East African country are apparently popular with some, such as Jens Spahn. The former health minister found surprisingly clear words after a trip. In an interview with the German magazine Stern, he called on Chancellor Olaf Scholz to show more leadership with regard to the federal government's migration policy. He looks more like his own briefcase, which he's now presenting to us on TikTok, than a political leader, is what the ex-minister said. In his view, a lot would already be achieved if there was just a spark of Gerhard Schröder from 2004 in Olaf Scholz. And that's an interesting comparison. The Social Democrat politician had, after all, shown leadership strength when he decided over 20 years ago that Germany would not support the resolution for the Iraq war at the United Nations. That was in fact a German no to the US war of aggression, which violated international law. Whether the former chancellor, who is now being criticized in his country for his closeness to Russian ruler Vladimir Putin, would support Jens Spahn in migration policy issues is purely speculative. The fact is, however, that the conservative politician is striking a similar tone to that which has already been used many times by conservatives in the British House of Commons in this migration debate. And you know my stance on that. But according to Spahn, deporting refugees with no prospect of staying to third countries would be the only humanitarian solution. The world must be told that the risk of crossing the Mediterranean is not worth it. Anyone who sets out on this journey will not arrive in the EU but in a safe third country, said Spahn. Persecuted people must be protected, but a refugee has no right to choose the country they flee to, he says. Words that the British Prime Minister, who is marketing his Rwanda campaign with the slogan "Stop the Boats," would certainly sign off on. The fact that refugees without papers could also be deported from Germany to Rwanda is not a problem, according to Spahn. The former health minister recently got his own impression of the East African country, which is sometimes already classified as an emerging country. Jens Spahn apparently sees it that way too, and Rwanda would be virtually the only stable and secure state in the region. He said this after a meeting with the autocratic ruler Paul Kagame. And since he explicitly wants to talk and negotiate with us, Olaf Scholz should now take up the issue. Whether he will do it, however, is currently unclear. Scholz recently promised refugees from Ukraine who are able to work that they will be granted security of residence provided that they also work now. But the whole discussion point here is something that the media often forget. And I know that Spahn, I'm a member of the same party, but I know that Spahn regularly launches some test balloons here to see how the public works and reacts to it. The EU is thinking about something similar, that is true, but only similar, not the same. And the differences are really striking here. The EU wants to set up centers to decide on the asylum claims in third countries. And those who have legitimate asylum claims, and here's the big difference, will be allowed to enter the EU. Only those that have no legitimate claims will be rejected and not being let into the EU. But the ones that have legitimate asylum claims, which is the difference to the Rwanda plans, is they will not be sent to a third country, despite what Spahn is thinking aloud here. They will be allowed to enter the EU. And there's the core difference between the Rwanda plans and what's being discussed in the EU at the moment. But of course, we need to do something. The way it's going is not working. And so they have to find better solutions. The EU is working on them. But getting 27 countries together is not always the easiest case. But working together is still the best one can wish for. Nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.